Hello and welcome to Metacognition with Phil Hulbig. Today I'm going to be reading to you an article that I have written on being neurodivergent. This is a sort of a shorter piece based on a much more detailed piece that I wrote as the concluding chapter of my book, The Pedagogy of Self-Authorship. And so I hope you enjoy it. It's titled, The Resiliency to Be Neurodivergent. If the neurodiversity movement is going to be truly successful, it will need to focus its efforts on helping others develop the resiliency necessary to be a neurodivergent thinker. But as a so-called dyslexic, even as I write these words, I am sure that they incorrectly express my meaning. This is because I know the logic and the errors that are inherent in the wording, the potentially obscuring bias. I can identify these obscuring assumptions and even give them a label. It's the medical model of disability. But I don't think that will clear up the potential confusion either. The truth that I'm trying to give words to here, in fact, is an expression of neurodivergent thinking. Statistically speaking, this means that if the readership of this article is a normative sample of the US population, probably 2/3 of the people reading will not interpret what I am trying to say the way I really mean it. And roughly 1/3 may even be offended, with ever smaller fractions of the population being even more offended than the last. This breakdown with language occurs at what I conceptualize as the edges of expression, that stage where words and ideas come together in a meaningful way for those who hear them. I have found that when others reach this liminal space between words and meanings, there is some underlying logic that leads them to coalesce around certain words for expressing certain ideas, but not others. I am part of a subset of the population for which this biological predisposition is not so readily available. However, I am far from the worst. And there are ever smaller fractions of people in my diagnostic grouping that demonstrate ever more difficulty making these connections with language. But back to the phrase, the resiliency necessary to be a neurodivergent thinker. When you think about someone who tries to explain their neurological difference in the detail as I've just done in the preceding paragraph, it's easy to think that the resiliency being spoken of is the resiliency related to the grit needed to soldier through the neurological challenges presented by my learning disability. And while I would agree that if you have an identified disability, you will need tremendous resiliency to deal with the challenges of your neurology. Do not underestimate this challenge, simply because it's not the same kind of resiliency that I'm talking about here. Your neurological challenges are not simple challenges, and they come in two forms. One that can be noticed by keen observers, and ones that are far more subtle. You may be the only person capable of observing them within yourself. This is the kind of resiliency that is necessary to survive as a neurodivergent person, which is definitely a very important form of resiliency in its own respect. Not all resiliency is the same. I believe that resiliency needed to confront one's biology is actually an easier form of resiliency to develop than the resiliency necessary to be a neurodivergent thinker. I believe this is because when you start to lean into your weaknesses, you will see growth. And it is the ability to see your own growth that promotes healing. This is why neurological conditions that involve some form of neglect or repression or disassociation, these are so difficult to contend with. These individuals have to become aware that there are perceptions that they do not perceive in forms of thinking that they can only have access to in a secondhand abstract way. The ability to experience improvement, however, helps you survive and become more resilient. But this important form of resilience It can be impaired. It can be damaged or destroyed by the actions of others. Unlike your biology, you may not even be able to see steady improvement in these interactions, or even be able to predict when they're coming. Your only recourse is to build a kind of social resilience that'll shield your consciousness and your soul from the damage that they can inflict. This resiliency to the cruelty of others is a confusing mix of angry tenacity and compassion for those very same people whose callous lack of insight into their own thinking makes their ability to conceptualize someone else's thinking difficult for them. Those undiagnosed minds who seem to move so quickly to installing a hierarchy and then placing themselves at the apex. However, it would be a gross overgeneralization to attribute this mindset simply to the undiagnosed neurotypical mind. In my experience, it's just as likely that a person with an atypical neurological presentation will be prejudiced. And they will express their prejudice in much the same way as everyone else does. And this gets closer to what I'm trying to express. The reason there are so many non-neurotypical people harboring ill feelings and prejudice against those with neurological disabilities, as there are neurotypicals harboring prejudice, is because these are groupings of people. And people have a hard time accepting differences. It's one of our common primate propensities for tribalism. It's a feature of the human species as a whole. Another common feature of being human is thinking differently than everybody else does, to a lesser or greater degree. There is absolutely no doubt that this is the case. No two people think the same. Maybe a case could be made for identical twins, but even here, the neuroplastic effects of experience will ensure that there will be differences over time. One twin will focus more on some things than the other, building skills and synaptic connections that the other will not. Each experience is uniquely processed and experienced by you, and every neurological ability that you have is uniquely yours. While experience makes us different and develops our unique skill set, exposure to new experiences is not always a good thing. Some experiences can cause damage. Maybe you were born with it. Maybe you were injured. Maybe somebody hurt you in a way that floods your system with fear and steals your personality from time to time. In all cases, the damage suffered from that experience leaves you changed, and you will never fully recover. This mental healing process, just like the physical process, will leave behind permanent scars. And sometimes those scars will change the way you have to do things. But in the healing process, you can gain back lost skills. We can feel ourselves get stronger as we recover. And we can take charge of a recovery to further improve our healing. This does not change the fact that there could be a level of damage that's irrecoverable. But this does not mean you stopped healing. Healing can continue until you find a way to live with that irrecoverable damage. Healing includes workarounds. It includes supports, even prosthetics that allow you to be the person that you desire to be. This ability to be is a certain mindset that reflects not just on the damage, but on the process of recovery. In the process of healing, we learn that we can move ourselves forward. How effectively we can learn from our healing experience will determine how we regulate ourselves towards healing in the future. And perhaps the most detrimental thing that can happen to a person is to incur damage to their ability to learn from their own healing. This is a post-traumatic inability to see healing that leaves you trapped and only able to speak of yourself in relation to the damage. For many, this causes them to seize on the label for their damage. a label that defines their limits for them. I've seen this mindset manifest across disability categories, personality types, races, and genders. It's a mindset born from tragedy, pain, and sorrow that can block the development of the resiliency needed to be neurodivergent. We have a responsibility to ourselves and everyone around us to orient ourselves towards healing, because trauma can create habits and thinking that prevent healing. The ability to persist in the face of persistent experiences of dehumanizing medicalization, judgments of inferiority, and just straight up cruelty is the resilience that is necessary to be a divergent thinker. I have spent years of my life thinking about my medical condition, studying it so that I could emerge from my shell of dyslexia a healed person. But what I've found is there's no healed person. There's only damaged old me. A person trying to get a handle on my weaknesses and express my strengths in a way that enable me to see my growth and transform into the person I most desire to be. While my differences were identified as a symptom of an underlying medical condition, they were really a simple manifestation of my individual difference and the differences in the way I have to function, which most other people don't have to contend with. There is a fear here that all contend with. For this reason, we fail to look at how we can use what the brain produces for healing. It supports a collective unwillingness to face the uncomfortable reality. It is a fear of those who need the help and support of their community, and a community that does not know how to help. You can hear it when politicians rail against welfare bums and the homeless. You can hear it in the voices of exasperated special education teachers who have run out of diagnostic tricks to support their students' impairment. You hear it from parents and relatives who've simply just had it with your shit. They don't mean it. They're scared. And that fear prevents them from seeing how scary it is for you. The actual person who suffers from that condition that makes them recoil. But there is a solution that I believe will work for them and enable them to identify these biases and the self-fulfilling prophecies that they harbor, even though those forces may be working just beneath the level of their conscious perception. However, no matter how I attempt to describe it, there are going to be people who are incapable of understanding what I am expressing here. Probably they'll come from backgrounds of privilege that never had to face deep adversity or daily abuse. They'll probably be white or black or brown. Most likely they'll be a man or a woman or trans. As expected, they're old boomer types or young zoomer types. You probably know the type. They're rich or poor or somewhere in between. You know how they think because all those people think the same way. I hope you see that this whole line of argument is a representation of the problem. What needs to be done is to engage these people in a conversation that helps them identify who they are, what they believe, and what they want this world to look like. Help them identify the best qualities in themselves, their strengths, and their highest aspirations. Discuss with them how they can use these strengths to work around or cancel out their weaknesses. What you will find is that they are not so different. You will find that they want a better future, and you can help them think about how to put it together. Help them with the planning and the difficult work that comes with self-transformation. Because I believe that this is the deep goal of the neurodiversity movement. The scientific evidence that this kind of self-transformation is possible is overwhelming. The processes that promote this transformation are already well researched and can be tied to much deeper processes of neuropsychological function. But if you can take this information and you can integrate it into your life, your transformation will affect those around you, in your family, and in your community. If you share this knowledge, you will empower those, regardless of their damage or disability, to heal and develop a uniquely powerful form of resilience that can enable the ability to be in the face of both open and implicit oppression. You will be able to accept and persevere and preserve the best parts of who you are and develop into the person you would like to be, even though your natural neurological diversity has caused you to think differently, a quality that we all share. Thank you.